Good morning. Here comes the sun. Yeah, I realized I said sunrise when it was sunset or sunset when it was sunrise, but I don't really care. I've been reading enough now that I had to give up on the little bitty mistakes. Little bitty. Okay, good morning. And this is chapter 8, and it's called More Road Shows. John Watson came from my neck of the woods in L.A., so I knew him by reputation. I mean, this boy was funky piano player, putting tacks on the back of handles to get that honky-tonk sound. Funky guitarist, playing with his teeth behind his neck and falling to his knees. Funky alto saxist, funky writer, filthy funky singer. Musically, he was the most advanced musician of my era. John was way ahead of his times. Birds are coming by. The shit he was doing in 55 wouldn't be understood till 67. Jimi Hendrix was the first to say he copped from Watson. John had sure enough mastered the guitar, dancing through the modern jazz chord changes and bringing T-Bone Walker's burning blues into the rock and roll era. He was also a hell of a showman. When he sang, he was an actor, animated like an opera artist, a blues opera. Big gestures, high drama, huge display of emotion. He painted the picture. Oh, these birds are all coming in. Can you see them down there? Like they wanted to be read to this morning, because usually they've been flying away from me. Big gestures, high drama, huge display of emotion. He painted the picture. That's why I dug him so deeply. Vocally, he was unpredictable, full of surprises and innovation, spontaneous and fresh. His licks came at you from funny angles, but always right on time. John was never premeditated. When he went into his pimp bag, he became a pimp. The slouch, the gestures, the whole attitude. I could see him on the corner running his hose. Physically, John was also bad. Built bad, looked bad, talked bad. I sure would have loved to have been his girl, but I wasn't. Unfortunately, he saw me as a sister. That was true of many of the cats. Girls would be crawling across the floor to get to John, and I would have joined them, except I knew it was no use. He could romance a woman something awful, but I knew that women could never, that woman could never be me. I settled in. I was one of the cats. I didn't mind. I can't tell if it's moving. I just see the pretty birds doing their pretty bird stuff. Just a little, okay, I'm gonna test. I'm probably making a mistake, but let's try so you can see the birds. They're all doing pretty stuff. Okay, let's go back. I settled in. I was one of the cats. I didn't mind. I was this young thing, still happy to be free of school and Dorothy. Abby of the Peaches made some of these trips, but more as my traveling buddy and helper than as a co-artist. By then, the Peaches weren't happening. Johnny Otis had packaged and sold me as a solo singer, and the group thing fell apart. There were some bad feelings. I didn't blame the girls for being pissed, but it was about survival, and I was surviving as Miss Etta James, who, oddly enough, was sometimes called by the nickname of Peaches. I was running around the country with some badass musicians. Big Jim Wynn had gigged with T-Bone. He was a rough and raunchy character who blew his sax while walking the tables and the bars in those juke joints we played across the South. He'd fall on his back and honk at the moon. He'd blast hot and heavy and was inspiration for a whole generation of hardcore saxists like Big J McNelly. As a band leader, though, Big Jim was a secondary Johnny Otis. John was more of a star. He was billed as young John Watson and was starting to sing his early hits, Space Guitar, Motorhead Baby, Highway 60. Even though I had something of a big voiced style of my own, the more I heard John, the more I tried to sound like him. He also made some records on modern. The big one was his cover of Earl King's Those Lonely, Lonely Nights. Like Hot Little Mama, I Love to Love You, and I'm Gonna Hit That Highway. Well, we sure did hit that highway. There were some fun times and some frightening shit. First, the fun. With the sun comes the wind. Okay, first the fun. Big Jim would be behind the wheel. It was a big old Buick Roadmaster, if I remember right. I'd be in the middle, John sitting shotgun. I'd angle to avoid that suicide seat, and the band cats in the back. Like I told you before, John was built lean and mean. His long, muscular legs dangled out in front of him while he dozed off. And the minute the engine started to purr, John snoozed off. After a few minutes, you could see he was dreaming some sweet dreams because he'd spread his legs and we'd see his manhood start growing. And growing. And growing some more. John had him some phenomenal manhood. Well, me and the cats would joke about it, but after a while I got sick of sitting next to it. So being somewhat mischievous, I'd take some rope and tie his legs together so they wouldn't fall open. That would sure enough bring his manhood down. Then I'd attach some string to the rope and tie everything up to the steering column. When John awoke, he'd start to holler, and, "Girl, you crazy. We could have had an accident and I'd be trapped in here." Well, the guys would start howling, and John would make me promise never to do it again. With my fingers crossed behind my back, I'd promise. And next trip, do it all over again. John knew I loved him. In Savannah, Georgia, I went in a pawn shop and bought him this skinny little recorder, an instrument that looked like it came from Shakespeare's time. I gave it to John as a joke and a dare. "Hey man, let's see what you can do with this." Well, don't you know, John mouthed that sucker and started tooting like Charlie Parker, fingers flying into frantic bebop riffs. Beautiful melodies from here to Mudpack, Mississippi. John could pick up a comb and make it sound like Mozart. John and Big Jim originally came from Texas. The minute we drove into their home state, things got real serious. Quiet, eerie. They eyed every highway patrolman and cop car with such caution, I called them paranoid. Coming from California, I had no fear of redneck cops. I had a lot to learn. Somewhere around Pecos, we stopped at a gas station. We'd been driving all day, and I had to go so bad my eyeballs were turning yellow. Hopped out of the car, ran across the station, and found myself facing two restrooms. One said white, the other colored. The boys jumped into the colored one before I had a chance. Well, I wasn't about to wait. I took care of business in the white restroom. Piss on them if they didn't like it. Back in the car, I was feeling lots better. Jim was just about to pull away, and John was stretched out in his usual shotgun position when here comes the gas station owner, fuming mad. "Hey, you," he said to me. "Didn't you just use the white bathroom?" Jim, who'd never backtalk anyone, started giving me the eye. "Be cool, John," who knew his state like the back of his hand, was making similar motions. I ignored them both. "Yeah, I used the white bathroom," I snapped back. "What of it?" That is off limits to people with the N-word. The man's face The white man's face was turning red. He was all steamed up, but I hated being called the N-word, and I hated his attitude. I don't care what's off limits, I said as Jim and John poked me hard in the ribs. You better care, bitch, the redneck replied, the veins in his neck popping out. He pushed his face close enough to me so I could smell his stinking breath. Fuck you, I said. What'd you say? You heard me. Fuck you. Next thing I knew, he'd pulled out a gun and pointed it at John. You better apologize, bitch, he said, or I'll blow his brains into your lap. Apologize, John said weakly. It didn't take me long to assess the situation. The redneck was an asshole, but given the circumstances, my choices were limited. All right, I spoke so softly hardly anyone could hear. I apologize. Damn, I hated doing it, but John was my brother and a great artist, and I'd be foolish to risk his life over bullshit. Didn't hear you loud enough, said the redneck. Say it again. I apologize, damn it, I hollered. I said a goddamn apologize. He put down the gun and we tore out of there so fast you'd think we'd done something wrong. And the next story. I think I was looking to do something wrong. When Big Jim, John, and I got back to Los Angeles, I couldn't see myself moving in with Dorothy or Daddy Sarge. There was no going back, and in my mind, no one to go back to. With a couple of hits under my belt, I was still looking for some hairy adventures. My soulmate turned out to be not some slick and hip jazz musician, but an extra cool white cat called Bobby Lopez, Jr., a boy about my age, 17, whose daddy provided the buses for many of those early tours. Fact is, Bobby's family owned the American Bus Company. Bobby was drop-dead movie star handsome, his big black pompadour spilling over his forehead. He had perfectly chiseled facial features. Over 6 feet tall, his body was beautiful, and his disposition sweet. He was a secret angel. I think of Bobby as my first and most loyal fan. He read the rebelliousness in my spirit and joined on in. Bobby was wild. The Top 10 tour was also wild. It was run by Irving Feld, whose father eventually owned the Barnum and Bailey Circus, and it featured an array of R&B singers. The tour would be rugged, 60 or 70 dates all over the South, especially tiny towns where we'd have to sleep in people's houses. Among the artists, there was a generation gap, the young versus the old. Of course, Bobby was aligned with the young people, with me. And he'd sit on the bus next to me or sometimes follow the tour in his 1955 Chevy Bel Air convertible with me by his... I can tell the wind is making this move, but I don't know what to do about it. I'll hold on to it with one hand. Of course, Bobby was aligned with the young people, with me, and he'd sit on the bus next to me or sometimes follow the tour in his 1955 Chevy Bel Air convertible, with me by his side. We'd stop by the side of a lake and peel off our clothes down to our drawers and jump in, have water fights like little kids, and carry on all afternoon. Bobby made movies with his home camera. You can see us going to the zoo, where I'm feeding the elephants and the monkeys, and acting like a crazy animal myself. You can also see that by then my hair was blonde. First, Dorothy had lightened up my hair to a carrot red and put it in spitz curls, but in Detroit, a gay guy bleached it until it was practically white and took out the curls. I was glad. To me, the curls were Shirley Temple or Susie Cream Cheese. I didn't want to look innocent. I wanted to look like Joyce Bryant. Joyce Bryant was this sexy black singer, good singer, who poured herself into fishtail gowns. They called her the Brown Bombshell, and she caught all kinds of hell for having blonde hair. I dug her. I thought Joyce was gutsy and I copied her style, brazen and independent. Funny as it might seem, I also liked Sophie Tucker. I liked her sassy attitude. She had a way with the song. And the Jewish comic Belle Barth broke me up. Ruth Brown was another role model. She had Mama, He Treats Your Daughter Mean. And I thought she was just too cool. When I met Ruth on the Top 10 tour, I saw she had all the moves. She wore this heavy makeup with painted cat eyes and dark extended eyelashes aimed up to the sky and turned down lips and Mexican kiss curls plastered on the side of her face. She was cute and sassy at the same time, with her long ponytail and her bow-legged walk, just swishing across that stage. Plus, Gatortail, Willis Jackson, was her old man, this fine brown dude who played horn and had hair processed to the bone. Every time he dropped to his knees to blow his sax, her hair would fall into his face, and he'd his throw head back, and I'd think, ooh-wee, this cat is too much. Ruth and Gator were a perfect match. I also liked Ruth because she aggravated the promoters. They hated how she demanded cash in advance before she sang a note. I remember when a nightclub owner said he wouldn't pay her until after the tickets were sold. Fine, said Ruth. Then you go out and sing. If you want me to rob my children's piggy bank to pay you this money, he asked her. Without blinking an eye, she replied, if that's what you've got to do. Well, that's what he did. He came back with the money, teaching me a mighty important lesson. My own image was largely created by gay boys. They were setting the style, and I was happy to go along. They pushed me to do the cotton club thing, to take advantage of my mulatto complexion by showing it off. It fixed me up as an outrageous blonde. But there was more to it than the old-fashioned picture of a privileged black girl. There was also a defiance to my look and a sleazy edge as well. For example, even though the Secret Angels bleached my hair, they would not bleach my eyebrows. Oh, no, honey, they'd say. You leave the eyebrows dark. That's how all the bad girls look. The bad girls were the whores who had the look I liked. The look my Aunt Cozy cultivated so well. I wanted to be rare. I wanted to be noticed. I wanted to be glamorous. I wanted to be exotic as a cotton club chorus girl. And I wanted to be obvious as the most flamboyant hooker on the street. I just wanted to be. Bobby Lopez understood my confused passions. He shared many of them himself. He also taught me about friendship. We really loved each other, though we never made love. He was my best buddy. As my traveling buddy, Bobby wanted to go everywhere I went. We were both escaping from parents who drove us nuts. Anywhere was better than home. I dug how Bobby was willing, even anxious, to jump into the black world of R&B. In the 50s, a white boy traveling with colored musicians, well, that could be tricky. When I played those extra funky buckets of blood down south, the joints with the sawdust on the floor and the chickens clucking out back, there was no way in the world he could go hang. Not as a Caucasian. So I'd paint him black. Got me some good makeup. After all, I'd watched Dorothy, Queen of the Night, do makeup my whole childhood. And I'd darken his face and hands until he looked like a brother. He loved it. Loved losing his white self. Loved being black for the night. That's a fantasy lots of white folks have, and loved being made up like an actor. Bobby was matter of fact about his good looks and bubbly personality, but I knew he could have been an actor. Most of the time our con worked. Sisters would spot the black. Bobby saying, "Would you look at that fine-looking thing over there with the young Etta James? Why do I believe he's her brother?" But not everyone was fooled. At some Texas roadhouse I was in between sets, me and Bobby were cooling out in a corner table watching the action on the dance floor while Bo Diddley was on stage singing "Say Man." When one of these bold "say anything to anyone" sisters came up to Bobby, checked out his picture-perfect little nose, put her hand on her hip, and went off. "Hell, this ain't no N-word. This is a white boy with a muddy face." Bobby squirmed while I nearly died laughing. Bobby was different. I knew that from the start because he was so bright and sensitive. I could talk to him more intimately than anyone else around me, but I really didn't understand him until a certain incident in Jacksonville. We liked staying in Florida because Ernie Busker, a Jewish guy who wound up buying his own island, had these 3 nightclubs in Jacksonville, Bradenton Beach, and Hollandale. Hollandale, whereby he could book us for a month. They were all called the Palm Clubs. Pay was decent, but mainly it was good being in one state for a while. Ernie's bouncer, a guy named Cornelius, fell for me. Cornelius was a country boy, a decent soul, and a cat so rough that when he told you to leave the club, you left. For a long time I latched onto men like that. The meaner, the better. They made me feel safe. Cornelius reminded me of Igor out of a horror film, the guy who lives in the tower and works for Dr. Frankenstein. Except Cornelius was handsome, but he didn't have much of a life besides guarding the Palm Club. I suppose in his eyes I was glamorous, this crazy blonde-haired yellow girl from California. Anyway, one day Cornelius went to Zale's jewelry store and bought me a diamond engagement ring. Just like that. I didn't know what to do. Bobby and I talked about it. "Etta, this Cornelius is wild for you," he said. "But I can't accept no ring," I insisted. "Well, whatever you do, don't make him mad." So I went along with it. I let Cornelius tell everyone in Jacksonville we were engaged, even though we never even exchanged a kiss. Cornelius was happy, just looking after me like I was Princess Grace. Meanwhile, Bobby was going through changes of his own. Guitar Slim, whose "The Things I Used to Do" had turned me out as a child, was on the bill with us, and he and Bobby got to talking. Slim was a strange one, a Louisiana swamp child whose electric guitar had a cord so long he'd wander into the street to bring in customers. He was backwoods and crazy as a loon. Well, one night when the Florida air was sticky, humid, and unbearably hot, one of these evenings when everyone was on edge, Bobby and Slim were huddled up. I happened to be walking down the hallway when Bobby burst out of Slim's room, screaming like his brain was on fire. He fell into this mad rage. There was a big icebox in the hallway with 30 or 40 empty beer bottles sitting on top. Out of control, Bobby started flailing his arms and fists and sweeping those bottles off the icebox, smashing them against the wall and the floor. He was crying. Took him to my room and let him sob. That was the night he told me dark secrets from his past. How his parents didn't understand him, how an uncle had abused him, and how he really didn't know who he was. For me, a 17-year-old girl, I had my first glimpse of seeing up close the confusion of a gay man. I always knew he was attracted to men, but it was nothing that we discussed. I remember Professor Hines and Reverend Wilson, our landlord in the Fillmore. They offered me a kindness and sensitivity and a different sort of intelligence, a light-hearted view of life I didn't find in the macho men who, in spite of myself, I'd often wind up with. Just the way you listen to me, said Bobby, makes me feel better. That's how I feel about you, I told him. You're the only one who can tell me what to do about Cornelius. That made Bobby smile. Well, you're certainly not going to marry him, he said. Not on your life, I agreed. Then you have no choice. Keep the ring, and when we get out of here, hawk it. Which is just what I did. From then on, Bobby and I got even tighter. We could share our appreciation of the male anatomy. We'd position ourselves by the door of the nightclubs and look over the fine brothers one by one as they came stepping on in. We'd carry on and gossip and share secrets of the heart. I'd tell him how I liked dark-skinned men. I didn't have anything against white boys, but I was turned on by coal-black brothers. Bobby wanted to know why. Couldn't say for sure, but I know it's sexual. Maybe forbidden fruit. Maybe the grass is greener on the other side. Not that light-skinned boys don't interest me, but my heat's turned up, back then and even now, by super dark complexions. Other light-skinned women have told me the same thing, so I think it's opposites attracting. So much was happening, so fast. It's the entertainment world. A few barriers were breaking down. In a big club outside of Memphis, I shared a bill with Elvis Presley. I didn't know what to expect. He turned out super cool and extra respectful, with his pleased to meet you, ma'am, gentlemanly manners. He also touched my heart many years later when my good friend Jackie Wilson was down and out, vegetating in some funky convalescent home. Elvis moved Jackie to a decent hospital and paid for everything. As a teenager, I was learning about character and developing my powers of observation. I have always been curious, but out on the road, in strange cities with strange people, strange musicians, strange fans, strange owners, strange cops, and strange robbers, human beings fascinated me more than ever before. I studied them. I put people under the microscope of my mind. I became a camera, closely observing everyone who crossed my path, trying to figure out why they did the things they did. Wasn't anything calculated on my part. It came natural. Being away from home, it became my preoccupation, sitting in a club and noticing everything about everybody, from the bottom of their feet to the tops of their heads. Before we even reached the clubs, though, I had a ball checking out the cast of characters traveling on the top 10 tour bus. Talk about a wild bunch. I'm not gonna make this, loves. Take Little Willie John. Some, and that includes me, rank Willie among the finest soul singers who ever lived. Ray Charles is given credit for inventing soul music, and Lord knows Ray deserves it. But cats like John Watson, Jesse Blevin, and Little Willie John, were singing souls just as early on as Ray. Singing soul? These were guys with big, beautiful voices and so much feeling. Blues feeling and church feeling that it felt like they lived 100 lifetimes. Willie and I were the same age. He was extra small and cute as a button, had these long eyelashes that hung like shades over pretty almond-shaped light brown eyes. Willie had the eyes of a doe and perfect teeth. He was a Scorpio, moody and deep, a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, just like his crazy daddy, who sometimes came on the road as a chaperone by way of New Orleans. Willie came from Detroit, where when he was only 12, he got with Paul Hucklebuck Williams. Another instance of someone getting in the business too early. Willie never did grow up. He sang with the pain and real-life experience of an adult. Sounded like a Jewish rabbi, wailing with 1,000 years of pain. He was deep. Willie had the musical emotions of a grandfather without ever becoming an adult himself. He played from the time he woke up until the time he fell asleep. He'd spill lemonade over your head, pick your dress up over your head, stick his finger up your booty. Willie would do anything for a laugh. This was the time of his biggest hit, Fever. And man, he was feeling his oats. He was wild with his drugs. He'd cop from a dealer who would be wearing a flashy diamond ring. "Oh, wow," Willie would say, "you gotta let me wear that ring, just for the show." Because Willie was such a hot star and lovable guy, the dealer would loan him the ring, only to learn, after the show, that Willie had vanished. Many were the times when we had to hide Willie under a seat or in the trunk of a car. He was so little and endearing, though, that even if the thugs caught him, they didn't do much more than slap him upside his head. Me and Willie were the babies of the tour. We looked at 30-year-olds like they were dinosaurs. Among the older crowd, Hucklebuck Williams was cool. He related to the kids and called me Noonie Baby. But there was a hell of a generation gap between us, and the older women like Faye Adams, whose big record was Shake a Hand, and Beulah Bryant. Poor Beulah. I think a lot about her now. We mistreated her something awful. She had a bladder problem and had to urinate every 10 minutes. So me and Willie got to calling her Miss Pisspot. We did terrible things. While Beulah was sleeping, we'd snap rubber band powered spitballs at her, waking her up and scaring her half to death. We'd smoke weed and rolled up old newspapers, stinking up the bus with these fat joints until everyone was coughing and falling out. When Willie got us a couple of guns, no teenagers supposed to have a gun, yet there we were shooting blanks down the galley of the bus, just to wake up the old folks. When I think of how I carried on, I'm ashamed. I'm also ashamed of what I did to a white guy named Margot. He was working for the Top 10 tour. At one point, his bosses loaned me $1,000. I thought they'd get it back by deducting $250 from 4 paychecks, which was about $1,000 a week. But when it came time to get paid, Margot said there was nothing for me. They were repaying themselves my loan. I went wild. I played the crazy girl game on Margot. While we were in some office in Kansas City, Missouri, I pulled a gun on Margot and stuck the thing in his ear. "What do you mean you ain't gonna pay me?" I screamed. "I'll kill you." "No, Etta," I heard one of the cats in the band cry out as he ran in to restrain me. "You can't kill this man." "The hell I can't," I insisted in a deranged voice that sounded like I'd lost my mind. Margot called his bosses to tell them what was happening, while I pointed this unloaded gun at his head. "Don't pay her. Don't give her a cent," I heard the home office screaming over the wire. But Margot was so scared, he took a briefcase filled with bills and threw it on the floor, pleading, "Just leave me alone and take the lousy money." I took it and was lucky Margot didn't have a heart attack. As much as I mistreated my elders, there were elders who mistreated me. Bo Diddley was one. Bo's all right. He's a big, macho guy who struts around with those thick old glasses. Thinks he's real buff. Wouldn't call him hot-headed, but he's egotistical as all get out. Arrogant. Along with a mess of other folks, he helped invent this new teenage music, except he wasn't a teenager. Bo about 10 years older than me. I think he might have liked me. I know he was always protective, talking like, "I'm Bo Diddley and I'm going to take care of you, child." He liked playing the part of Papa. Do this, don't do that. I never paid him no mind. Oh, one late, drizzly afternoon in Alabama, the bus had arrived at the gig while I was still sleeping. Bo tried to shake me awake, but I resisted. "Get up, girl," he shouted. "Get up now." I wasn't ready to get up. I told him to get on my face. Well, when he heard that, he slapped me. Pow! Full across the mouth. That got everyone's attention, especially the Clovers, who were sitting across the aisle. They saw the whole thing, and big Harold Lucas, the baritone of the group, stepped right up to Bo and said, "Man, you touch her again and you're going to have to deal with all us Clovers." Bo backed off quick. The Clovers were cool. They had their one mint julep, lovey-dovey. Down in the Alley, and Devil or Angel, which was copied by Bobby V. Their Blue Velvet was super smooth, and you can hear how much Bobby Vinton based his version on theirs. These were also mature men, married, and real responsible. The Five Keys, who also made some of those tours, were another story. They were more in my generation. They had two great lead singers. Rudy West sang Red Sails in the Sunset, and Marilyn Pierce did Close Your Eyes. Marilyn was something else. He was a skinny dude and loved to love on women. Marilyn went with everyone he saw. He left quite a trail behind him. Watching him pick up chicks, I'd chuckle to myself. I quit chuckling, though, when a guy whose wife had been one of Marilyn's conquests showed up at the gig with a gun, shot Marilyn through the stomach, blew his guts out. Marilyn barely survived. He had to quit the road for a year, teaching me another lesson I would never forget. Alright, there's like 5 pages left. I know it's going to cut us off, but I'm going to go on. The more I worked, the more I got. This was when I got to meet the mystery lady, the woman I so closely associated with my mother, Billie Holiday. Nearly 40 years after it happened, it's a scene I can still see, detail for detail. I was called to New York to do a radio show for NBC called Jazz Plus Blues Equals Soul. It was Count Basie, Billie, and me. Well, I knew Count Basie was jazz, but who was blues, me or Billie? The term soul music wasn't yet in use, so the distinction between me and Billie wasn't clear. Funny thing how those categories would haunt and confuse me for years to come. Even now I'm reminded of my lifelong conflict with Dorothy, who so badly wanted me to be jazz, while my rebellious spirit ran to hot and nasty rhythm and blues. The broadcast wasn't held in a normal studio, but in a place that looked like a lecture hall or a school auditorium. Technicians were milling about. Mics had been placed. Count and his band were warming up on stage, looking cool and confident. I was ready to sing my little Roll With Me, Henry. But I was mostly waiting to see the great Billie Holiday. She was late, and everyone knew it. Everyone was waiting for her. Anticipation was high. I was seated by these swinging doors. The entrance she'd been walking through, she would be walking through. Every time the doors would swing open, I'd hold my breath, expecting it to be Lady Day. I sat up straight out of respect for Miss Holiday. I was nervous. Hell, I was on the verge of meeting royalty. Finally, the door swung open, and there she was. Slowly, she came walking in with a man on either side of her. They seemed to be supporting her, though I couldn't tell whether she actually needed their help or not. I expected her to be short, but she wasn't. She was dressed in a pretty green 2-piece suit. She was made, but not overly made. Her red lipstick looked greasy, and her eyes looked tired. She wore a pair of heels with spaghetti straps, which is when I noticed her swollen feet. Terribly swollen. My eyes went from her feet to her hands, which were so puffy they looked like boxing gloves. I didn't want to stare, but I couldn't help it. My heart was hammering. I had to get a good look at Billie Holiday. I wanted to say, "Hi, I'm Etta James, and you're Billie Holiday, and my mother loves you, and I love you too." But I didn't want to seem like a crazy groupie, so I didn't say anything. I kept sneaking wrinkly vision glances at her, looking out the corner of my eye. That's when she caught me. Our eyes locked. "Are you looking at me?" she asked in a voice that sounded very old. "Yes," I had to answer. She looked down at her own swollen hands and rubbed them together as though in pain. "Just don't ever let this happen to you," she said, and with that walked away. Maybe she saw the wildness in my eyes. Maybe she saw the trouble waiting for me. Either way, I never saw Billie Holiday again. We have 3 pages left. I don't know why this is working, but we're going to keep going. Booking agents like Jack Archer hooked me up with different tours. I was on the bottom of the bill, but happy to be on the bill at all, because I was still way underage. They also hooked me up with guardians, starting with Johnny Otis. These guys turned out to be responsible. One of my favorites was Clifton Chenier. Clifton was a good man from Opelousas, Louisiana, who was playing world music decades before the term was invented. They called him King of Zydeco, and he played beautiful Squeeze Box. Squeeze Box Boogie was one of his big hits, but he did more than blow accordion. He sang in Creole and French patois, and had him the first real swinging band I'd ever worked with. A big-bottomed rhythm section and 4 fat horns. I loved the exotic flavor of his swamp sounds, but I also respected his musicianship. He had his boys playing all the hippest big band R&B. It wasn't a Roadhouse down home B.B. King type of groove, but an upbeat brand of blues. Lionel Prevost was on tenor, Philip Walker on guitar, Francis Candy on bass, Wilson Simeon on drums, all strong, playing pretty cats from Louisiana. Clifton had hits on My Soul, A Petite Filly, and The Cat's Streaming, because I had nothing besides Roll Me Henry and Good Rockin' Daddy. I was mostly singing other artists' material. Clifton's band would back me on Bobby Bland's Further Up the Road or Little Junior Parker's Next Time You See Me. Man, we tore up all those Houston blues. Clifton was a sweet and honorable married man who spoke with a Creole accent and looked after me like I was a child. There's a little Uncle Tom in Clifton, which was true of many guys his age, but what was said about Louis Armstrong also applied to Clenier. He might have tommed, but he tommed from the heart. One time we were driving around Laurel, Mississippi. Nothing but redneck restaurants, segregated to the teeth. So we went to a market instead, figuring on buying picnic goodies. White man wouldn't even let us touch the fruits and vegetables. N-word couldn't touch the food. We had to point to what we wanted, bought us some potato chips and pork chops, then drove out to a roadside park. On the way, the car, one of those old airport jitneys, broke down. Clifton fixed it in a second. Clifton was an ace mechanic and a good cook to boot. We get to the roadside park, and there's another party of people on a picnic, 6 or 7 white folks. That makes Clifton uptight, so he leads us to a secluded part of the park. Fine, I'm hungry. Let's get to it. We break out our Coleman cooker, and I start cutting up vegetables. Clifton breaks out his little frying pans and skillets. He's always equipped. Puts the canned heat up under the burner and starts firing up the grease. He had dropped in 2 or 3 pork chops when up drives the highway patrol. I don't think nothing of it, because this here is public grounds, God's grounds. No one could argue with that. Picnic grounds is for everyone. Dumbass cop don't have to say much, just looks at Clifton. "Y'all through?" asks the lawman. "Yeah, about ready to haul on out of here." "What?" I shout. "Hell no, we're not ready to go anywhere." I point to the pork chop cooking in the grease. "Can't you see we're getting ready to eat?" I ask. "Why, yes, sir, we are sure leaving," said Clifton, who's been warning me for weeks to watch myself here in the South. "What are you talking about?" I asked, growing irate. Now I'm pissed at the cop and Clifton. "I'm starving." "Hey, you with the big mouth," says the cop, pointing his fat finger in my direction. "You a white woman?" "No, I ain't no damn white woman." "Prove it." "What do you mean, prove it? You stupid or something? Show me an ID." I'm ready to show him my fucking middle finger, but Clifton and the boys are giving me the eye as if to say, "Shut up, bitch, for you get us all thrown in the slammer." I go to the car and find an ID. While the cop looks it over, Clifton's dumping grease in the trash and packing up pork chops. We ease on out of there, me biting my tongue until it hurts. No food for Etta. No way to tell the whole Clifton Chenier story without introducing Blondine. She was the girl traveling with me when Abby and the other Peaches stayed back in California. Blondine deserves a book of her own. When I think of Blondine, I still shake my head with wonder. This girl was out there. Blondine came out of Queens, a girl group led by Shirley Gunter, the blind sister of Cornell Gunter of the Flares. The Queens had a hit with the Oop Shoop, which was copied by the Crew Cuts. I'd say the Queens were the first female group where all the gals could sing. Shirley sang her ass off. Blondine quit the group to travel as my companion. She could play a piano, but mainly she could play men better than anyone else. Better than anyone since Eve hooked Adam. Men just fell for Blondine. She was a redhead at first, but when she went with me, I brought her hair up to blonde. She was a brown-skinned, good-looking girl with hazel eyes, long legs, large bust, cute face, big beaver cheeks. Very skinny, very sexy. Loved wearing those super short skirts. I never had met anyone so uninhibited when it came to giving the boys what they wanted. Blondine was an eye-opener for me because in spite of all this traveling and time away from home, I still hadn't gone with anyone except Fonz back in the San Francisco projects. Stupid little affair that was over before it started. I liked looking more than doing. My thing was sneaking a peek. Call me a peek freak. After the gig, Clifton would escort me to my room. You go to bed, baby, he'd tell me in a fatherly way. Hate to do it, but I best lock you in. The second I heard the outside lock click, though, I'd be climbing out the bathroom window and crawling along the pipes, peeping into whatever action I could find, or actually sneaking into a room and getting one of the cats to take me to the after-hours club. We'd party all night, not screwing, but drinking and dancing and smoking, not getting back till morning just a few minutes before Clifton would knock on my door. Poor baby, I'd hear him say, locked up all night. I'm sorry, honey, but I had to do it for your own good. You can get dressed now. We're about ready to hit the road. The arrival of Blondine, though, turned Clifton's temperament from good to bad. Blondine, Clifton would tell me, that girl has to go. She's fucking up my whole band. She breaks up homes and makes the guys crazy. No good, that girl. No good. I knew what Clifton meant. We'd find some nasty old colored motel to check in to with a pool the size of a postage stamp. Blondine would go for a dip, talking about how she really didn't know how to swim, while every man in that band would jump in after her, ready and willing to show her how to swim. I could be drowning over at the side and no one would notice. What does Blondine do? Asked Clifton. It makes all the boys so dizzy in the head. I really couldn't say. All I knew was that one by one, every guy fell head over heels. Philip Walker, the guitarist, almost killed another cat over the love of Blondine. She had dropping like flies. Can't have it, Clifton would start wailing. Can't have my boys fighting all up and down the road. She's no good. She'll make me lose my band and my money. Send her home. When the boys in the band heard that Blondine might be leaving, they threatened mutiny. Clifton had to retract, letting Blondine stay till the end of the tour. When we got back to L.A., though, Blondine and I were a little lost. We were broke and didn't know where to go. Dorothy was nowhere to be found. It was my daddy, Jesse Sarge Rogers, who saved the day, saying how he was proud of me. I had left as James Etta and came home as Etta James, with my blonde hair and my little hit records. It was good to see Daddy. This was a slack-back period when we didn't want to work a lick. Not Blondine, not me. We were a couple of lazy bitches laying up in the bed till noon. Meanwhile, since the passing of Mama Lou, Sarge hadn't changed. He was still a well-known tight ass. In the ghetto, where everyone's scamming and conning everyone else, no one could hoodwink Daddy. This self-taught real estate man who had the first dime he'd ever made. Sarge started talking to me about putting away some money to buy a house or some property of my own, but I was too dumb, too young, too wild to listen. A week or so after me and Blondine moved in with him, I noticed her running out to buy some groceries. Didn't think much of it till a couple days later when she came back with new nylons. How'd she get that money? What was going on? Well, a fool could see that Sarge was going around the house whistling and smiling and acting a whole lot happier than usual. At first they kept it hidden from me, but I knew. Daddy and Blondine were bumping. She had to be giving the old man some head. When it came to head, Blondine was queen. My own head was aching. I didn't want to think about my father sleeping with my friend, but that's just what was happening. They got more open about it, and I got more upset. Hey, I'm no prude, but this, after all, was my daddy, the authority figure when I was a little kid. I tried to tell Blondine how I felt, but she just smiled and did as she pleased. Sarge is a sweet man, is all she said. I like your daddy. You bet your sweet ass you do, I replied. But why you gotta be messing with him? I should have saved my breath. There was no reforming Blondine. And truth be told, there was no reforming me. All right, that is the end of chapter 8. I've been reading to you from the book, Raised to Survive. Thank you for being with me. The next chapter, chapter 9, will be Kings and Queens. And it is not very long. This was a long chapter. I was trying to squeeze it all in one video. I appreciate you.